I used to think of FP&A as like linguistics because we're all speaking the same language, but everyone has a different accent. So you focus on different things, you
Ooh.
care about different things. But at the end of the day, in order to communicate it, you need to be able to speak it in a way where people understand it, but you need to be able to change how you're saying what it is that you're looking at to really recognize the value that you can give. Because otherwise, you're going to walk away and someone's going to end up being like, wow, I get what he was trying to say, but that just sounded really weird.
Is this thing on?
Yesterday's price is not today's price.
Haha, yes indeed, Fat Joe. Welcome to Run the Numbers, where I interview world-class CFOs, operators, and the investors who fund them on how to get the most out of your company's performance. This podcast is a playbook of sorts for ambitious people in the worlds of finance, strategy, and operations. Today, this episode is a bit different. My guest is Alex Peterson, my first FP&A hire when I worked at Sneak. Alex and I shared a hyper-growth journey for the ages, 10xing the company in 3 years. And in our time after that, we each learned the good and the bad about seeking a new role. This was a chance for him to turn the tables on me in many ways and ask questions about how I ended up where I am today and what I think I'm good and bad at. On this episode, we cover how many at-bats it takes to get a new job as an FP&A manager in software. It's more than you think. Putting people in spots on the floor very early when they join the company so they can knock down shots and build confidence. What I'm most proud of in my career so far. How many damn S1 statements I made this poor guy read, and building out an investor relations function from scratch. This episode is two old friends sharing war stories and hanging out and talking about net dollar retention rates. So grab a Miller Lite, polish off your Datadog 10Ks, and get to know me a little bit better. All this and much, much more after a short word from our sponsors. As a SaaS CFO, I know firsthand how difficult it is to report on SaaS metrics. We've all seen a deal close at the end of the month, but the customer's contract doesn't actually start until the middle of the next month, creating the classic discrepancy between bookings or committed ARR and actual ARR, the real stuff. That's why I'm so pumped to be partnering with Maxio, a company trusted by thousands of SaaS companies to understand these reporting nuances. They basically built and automated the SaaS dashboard I tried to manually cobble together for 3 years. In 2022, SaaS Optics and Chargify combined to become Maxio, the only billing and financial operations platform that was purpose-built for B2B SaaS. They're helping SaaS finance teams automate billing and RevRec, manage collections and payments, and put together investor-grade reporting packages. Visit maxio.com/runthenumbers to learn how Maxio can help you supercharge financial operations in 2024. Request a demo using the Run the Numbers link and receive a 10% discount on your first year with Maxio. That's maxio.com/runthenumbers. If you're a startup founder or executive running a growing business, you know that as you scale, your systems break down and the cracks start to show. If this resonates with you, there are 3 numbers you need to know: 37,000, 25, and 1. 37,000. That's the number of businesses which have upgraded to NetSuite by Oracle. NetSuite is the #1 cloud financial system, streamlining accounting, financial management, inventory, HR, and more. 25. NetSuite turns 25 this year. That's 25 years of helping businesses do more with less, close their books in days, not weeks, and drive down costs. 1. Because your business is one of a kind. So you get a customized solution for all your KPIs in one efficient system with one source of truth, manage risk, get reliable forecasts, and improve margins. Everything you need in one place. Right now, download NetSuite's popular KPI checklist designed to give you consistently excellent performance, absolutely free at netsuite.com/metrics. Oh yeah, your boy loves metrics. That's netsuite.com/metrics to get your KPI checklist. That's netsuite.com/metrics. I really need this, guys. Please go to netsuite.com/metrics. Woo! Alex Peterson, welcome to the number 23 business podcast in Venezuela.
Number 23 in Venezuela, number 5 in Cambodia. I wonder where we're going to be at top 10 next week. You never know, I guess.
I hear Venezuela, they export oil and they import Run the Numbers.
Yeah. I mean, when you think about it, if there's one thing I've learned about consumption-driven businesses for something like oil that could really do some KPI tracking down there.
So for context, each week I get the pleasure of interviewing people. I wanted to try a different format where you can get to know me a bit better and also some of the people in my network. And what better way to do that and bring out a different side of me than a former colleague, a current friend, and one who's very smart, Alex, who I've had the pleasure of working with did we work together for 3 years, man?
Yeah, pretty much. And I mean, I think along the way, I mean, I run it back to say, when I first started, you kind of gave me not only the intro into FP&A broadly, but into kind of the SaaS startup world. What better way to kick that off than starting in March of 2020, where I think on day 2, I was looking at circuit breakers crashing on all 3 major indices going, hey, I'm really excited to be starting here, but I feel like I'm watching capitalism crash around us. And you were just like, that's fine. I was around 2008. It's the same deal.
Didn't you interview with me in like an empty WeWork office? It's like some boiler room shit.
No, it was awesome because when I first got there, we had done a first round just via Zoom, so we were already getting some really good dry runs in for the next 2 years. I was just down the street. It was at the old Hancock building in Boston, but the WeWork for Sneak had just shifted to another WeWork that was like 2 blocks over. We both showed up to the right building, but it was just like all the offices were completely cleared out and emptied, and you were like one of like 3 people left in the whole building. And I'm sitting in the WeWork office, and I walk up to the front desk, and I'm like, "Hey, I'm here to interview at Sneak," and they go, "Oh, they don't have offices here anymore." And I was like, "I'm sorry," and they're like, "Yeah, no, they haven't been here for like 3 weeks." And I was just like, yeah, I'm not sure if this is my startup origin story or what. And then like within about 10 seconds of that starting to ruminate in my mind, you walked up. You're like, hey, are you Alex? And I was like, cool. Okay, I made it to the right place.
Well, I walked up. I was like, who's this 6'7" man? Like you didn't look as tall on Zoom.
Yeah. No, that was another fun part of COVID and working with people for 2 years and then finally meeting in the office and just like towering over people and always laughing about how it's like, that's the one thing that's never come off well on a webcam is anything related to size and dynamic.
So a couple of fun facts about Alex. So he's an FP&A and investor relations pro at this point. He's extremely tall. He swam in the Olympic trials when he was in college, and his parents are neighbors with the baby.
Yep. No, all of that is very true. And when I think about it, I think in terms of stack ranking, the things that are most important to me nowadays, DaBaby's definitely still up there. And I mean, I'm sure he's a frequent viewer. So I'm sure at this point, I mean, it's good to get that shout out there. And yeah, when I think about all the things that kind of tied in, I like to think that a lot of swimming and endurance practice too just really relates itself well to the cadence of FP&A because there's nothing that prepares you for like the monthly and quarterly review of BVA, like staring at a black line on the bottom of the pool for 3 hours. You just change the line from black to red, call it a day, put that on a chart, send it over to the board, and you're good to go.
And so we worked in FP&A at a pretty unique time. I was brought aboard as the director of FP&A at this job, and Alex was my first hire. We later built out the investor relations team a few years into that journey, but holy crap, like when you look back at that, we literally 10x'd everything. We were a part of a ride during that COVID period. I think you saw like me riding away on my scooter for the last time for like a year and a half. But from then on, it was all up and to the right.
Yeah. And it's funny when you put it that way too, because, and I know we'll probably get into it down the road in terms of, what have the past few years been like. When I recount it to new colleagues or in the context of an interview or whatever it is, I've actually had so many people where it's like they have the eyebrow raise moment where they're like, oh, I'm sure there's like a little bit of embellishment here when you're talking about, headcount 5x'd in 2.5 years or whatnot, or like top line was 3x over the course of that period of time. And you're like, no, I mean, it's the unique opportunity to work at a SaaS business in the right space during COVID economics for the entirety of that period where you were working on historicals prior to that period. And I mean, we used to always joke, I laughed like coming in from comp consulting and walking in, like first thing was like, hey, get really good at understanding the headcount model during COVID. That was a really interesting way to kind of learn how to work with a not dry headcount plan at all.
So I was employee 150, and then I was there exactly 3 years to the date. And the headcount when I left was 1,500, and the revenue figure had also 10x'd in that time. And I think like when you're in the moment, you don't realize that you're a part of like this crazy, wacky thing that's going on. You're just kind of along for the ride. Do you remember that we built the operating plan in March? It was like the first thing we did together, and we instantly just had to throw it out.
Yep. No, like very fondly in retrospect, where I laugh because one of the funny things for me as well was obviously we started doing so much public comp research, because then in the kind of craze that came after in 21 and mid to early 22, you had all of these alike businesses going out the door. So you got to take a look at that 2 to 3 year past historical financial view. And it was almost detrimental to the thought process of what does a traditional SaaS business look like at this point, because everyone was sitting at unprecedented metrics on all top line, bottom line, like people kind of pretended to not look at for a long period of time. And so you're just like, wow, like look at how much growth that insane burn is driving. And then lo and behold, you exit to 23 and now 24 and everything's like, 180 in terms of the flip. But yeah, it was a lot of fun. And I mean, combining that with all the conversations, learning how to build those relationships, learning how to make those adjustments live, it was probably like putting a plane together in midair, except it's twice the speed you'd normally be doing it at.
I feel like we were both blessed and we were cheated in the experience, because in a sense, we got a front row seat. I wouldn't even say we were passengers. We were helped driving what was going on. But I did have a bit of a come down where I was like, oh no, this isn't the norm. This isn't what it's supposed to be like in the next SaaS job.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, I think that was like a very commonly uttered phrase of this is not the norm. This is a really unique opportunity. Combine it with the environment, combine it with the culture, and then add that on top of it. And I used to just laugh where I was like, well, there is absolutely something to be said for the dopamine rush of having a raise every 7 months and seeing what that looks like. But then at the same time, like to your point, recognizing the ramifications of that down the road and trying to kind of tie yourself to that. Law of large numbers exists in multiple different ways. And I think that was what was always really interesting. Looking back now, 3 years does not feel like 3 years. It feels like if you can multiply that by 5, because every individual year period felt like its own life cycle in a way.
I used to just be able to like Slack you like, BTW, we just raised another 150 million. It's like, oh, it's Tuesday.
It was a pretty cool period of time. I distinctly remember when we were doing a competitive like we were doing vendor research.
Yeah.
And we're having a call with one of the private tech stack business analytics platforms. And they came on the call and they were looking really smug. And I was like, oh, I wonder what this is going to be about. And they're like, so, obviously we know you guys raised some money and this and that, whatever. And we've got this fantastic pitch to give you about how, up to speed we are on the data analytics. But they were referencing the previous raise that had closed like 4 months ago. And I think we'd like just closed, and like finances and me, who had not been in the room, was just told like 2 days beforehand. And I remember I'm sitting there on the call and I was kind of like side-eyeing you on the webcam, like, how do they know this? I was kind of like, also side note, like, I promise I didn't tell anybody. And then it was like, oh, lo and behold, it's just like that 6 month out of date window when things are just moving that quickly.
That was probably Chris Venti and Andy Detweiler, our homies from Virtual Research.
Yep.
Shout out their benchmarking stuff. And you probably read more pages of S1s during that period than any human out there.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun to really throw in all of that Edgar and 401, everything from Def 14As to, whatever, in terms of like, the one thing that I was never able to get us sold on for licenses was BAM SEC, which, I mean, I don't want to ever go back to it, but running around. And I remember, I think one of the fun ones too was getting everybody on the finance side up to speed with all of my different acronyms for all the filings within the SEC ecosystem, and people being like, here's the Def 14 plus the Form 4s for all this. So you can kind of check the equity history, and everyone's like, Alex,
what does this bottom line? What is it? Yes or no?
Yep, exactly. It was like, yes, no, how much of a allocation am I putting in my 401k? Let's go.
So give it to the people straight. What was I like as a boss? Good, bad, indifferent?
Well, definitely not burying the lead at all. No, I mean, that's one of the fun things about working with you, right? And I remember what was funny was for the first like 6 to 12 months, I remember I kept asking myself, I said, I'm still trying to figure out if CJ is just a really nice guy or if I'm just doing a good job. Because one of the things that I thought you were really, really good at from the get-go was identifying strengths and then putting me in a position to utilize those. And so when we talked about that, right, like if it's like valuable, really quick rundown was when I started working for you, I was really solid at doing public market research coming from a consulting background.
Killer.
And that was the thing, was you put me in a position to utilize that skill set very naturally. And so when we would have conversations around, hey, we're taking a look at understanding our international employee base. Can you kind of give me a little bit of additional supplementary data to back that up?
Oh, I remember that.
Yeah, exactly. Right. But it was just like, hey, I mean, this is second nature to me at this point. I'm able to very easily bring this data to something that is novel to me, which is establishing those skill sets within an FP&A function organically in the business. And that was the thing was, those conversations and establishing that skill set might have been the difficult part for me at that point in my career. But I was able to do so in a way that was really comfortable to me because all the data, all of our storytelling was coming from something I'd done for years. And so as I built that out in terms of kind of like thinking about you as a boss, right? I think one of the things that you were so good at was not only leveraging that and putting me in a position to succeed, but then doing so in a way that continuously expanded my skill set. Like it wasn't just like, hey, back room, do the BVA and kind of export that every like 3 weeks. And if I have a question, I'll ask you to rerun it. You would allow me to sit in those meetings. You would allow me to learn. You would allow me to ask questions.
Yeah.
And that was the thing, was that I thought it accelerated my skill set. And then I think one of the things that combined into that was you put me in enough of a position where I could expand myself to the point where then you were able to identify weaknesses. You were able to say like, hey, okay, here are some things that you can focus on. Here are some things where you do have a weakness or we want to continue to build this out. And I think that's one of the things, again, for that point in my career, to be able to have someone who was not only a mentor, but also someone who could really kind of dive in and say, look, I'm not too far removed from where you were. I understand like how I used to approach this stuff. Here's some suggestions from how I did it. But also like, here's some things that I think you can leverage your own unique skill sets and do that better.
It's good to reflect on it because I didn't realize I was doing this at the time. And I've actually tried to double down on it in my career now. And it's when you have somebody new identifying what their shot on the court is that they're very comfortable with. And for you, it was public market research and benchmarking. And then over time, you can basically make them build up confidence in that shot, get them to their spot on the floor, let them knock it down over and over, and then keep moving them back by 2 or 3 feet each time.
Yep.
And then you end up seeing that now they're really good off the dribble from 3-point line. And I've tried to do that with other people I've worked with because I think a lot of bosses will take like whatever the list of things they had on this like hypothetical job spec that they had and just ask the person to do it off the bat. But you want somebody to build up confidence at what they already know so they feel like they're proving value to you. And then after that, you can continue to extend their role and responsibility.
Yeah, that was not only how it felt working for you, but I think then a natural evolution that came from that was like, lo and behold, 1.5 years, 2 years down the road, we're saying, hey, you came up to me in the office after we'd come back from COVID and you're like, we might be building out an IR team. Is that something that's interesting to you? One of the big components of that is going to be taking the existing skill set we've been building, and we're going to continue to do comp and a lot of public benchmarking, obviously, but now we're going to kind of flip it on its head and say, now we're the ones that are publishing that from a public facing perspective. Can you utilize that existing ability to contextualize what the public market, what different audiences are going to look at, and then also bring in all of the data analytics that we've talked about, communication skill sets, FP&A, and then building those cross-functional relationships to support it with product marketing, with the engineering teams, whoever else. You were able to kind of expand that. And so when it's time to step up and evolve that, to your point, like move the shot 3 steps back, you're like, I mean, it doesn't feel like we're doing anything different, even though the end product has then been translated to something else.
And I think the confidence piece comes out of something that I've noticed in myself, just to be a bit vulnerable, that like I'm very much a momentum player, momentum shooter. Like if I miss a couple shots in a row, like I'll be in my head. They joke like Deion Waiters or like Kobe Bryant, like pull the trigger, doesn't matter. I'm just going to keep shooting. Dame Lillard's like that. He'll pull up from half court if you miss 15 shots in a row, doesn't matter. I'm not like that. I will get in my head and I will spiral. Like if I make 2 mistakes in a row, I'm going to make a third and a fourth. So it's like, I got to get back into my groove. And I think I've tried with other people to put them in a position where they feel like, no, I'm rolling here. And now I feel confidence to, like I said, take 3 steps back.
Totally. No, and I mean, I think vulnerability or otherwise, I was very much the same way. I think actually in some instances you expressing that, like it's part of the reason why I thought you were a fantastic boss for me, because I think you understood that. And for me, it was, look, I can really lean on things that I'm comfortable on. I can continue to expand, and I've got the appetite and the capability to expand the skill set. I want to be successful though. And that was the thing, is you're like, you know that when you've got the self-motivation going on, point me in the right direction, I'm going to do as much work as I can to get the job done. But then we can continue to build off of that. And I remember a really good example was about 2 years ago, I think to the dot at this point, was I was taking a trip. We were building out a kind of bingo book of investors that the C-suite was going to be meeting at. It wasn't for RSA. We had like a separate, it might have been Morgan Stanley's tech conference, in March. And it was like this 100 plus investor list of like a lot of qualitative breakdowns or whatnot, including like tying off like existing portfolio holdings to like not only investor targeting, but also looking at like, hey, like who will be met with, what's the history? Long story short, it's the classic, hey, I'm trying to get through a bunch of data. We've got our existing BVAs for February or January at that point, whatever it was. And I'm laughing where I'm like going out of town. And I remember I was flying.
It's right here. I'm
there you go.
Up.
Yeah, exactly.
It's 112 pages.
I was going to say, it looks a little thin. But I remember I laughed because I was flying into Toronto. I got off the plane. I used the phrase, I was like, I'm fleeing the country. And I remember I opened my phone to check Slack instinctively, the first thing I did after being offline for all of 2 hours. And you'd gotten around to looking at it. You said, hey, like whatever it was, I knew that there's always like a phrase that you can tell like with a different boss or whoever it is when you're comfortable knowing like what coded messages mean. And you were like, let me know when you've got a second to catch up. And I was I was like, uh-oh. And I was like, we're going to triple time some edits here. Because obviously at that point, I was like, never leave you hanging beyond that. But I was like, yeah, we went through. And I just remember I was like, how did I make that? You know, I missed this meeting that we had, or like there was this calendar invite or whatever else. I took those 10 mistakes and whatever else, and I cataloged them to your exact point. And so even though it was like, hey, qualitative, quantitative skill sets require different skill sets, you're still building that out. Let's continue to focus on it. I remember the week after I got back, you were out for that meeting on site. You were like, hey, while I'm gone, like here's like 2 or 3 things I want you to do. And I remember I was like, I'd never spent longer on those 5 or 6 slide decks as we were building out different bingo books or different data sets or whatever else. And you came back and I remember you used the phrase, oh, wow, I should give you negative feedback more often. This is really good. And I remember thinking that because I was like, as much as it's silly, and I think people talk about that with reporting relationships, dynamics and whatnot, I think a really important thing, and again, especially for someone like me, where you're getting into the early mid stage of your career, is to have someone who's like, hey, I'm going to build you up, but I'm not going to be afraid to point out when things don't meet standard or when there's things you could do better. Because not only like you might take it too hard, you might ruminate on it, but the bigger thing is if I rob you of that, you need to have the appetite and the motivation to take it and digest it and build off of it, which I think that was great. Because I think otherwise you're not going to get better. You're not going to get as good as you could be if someone's just like, all right, I'm going to kind of keep it like softball only and throw you stuff that I know you'll hit 100% of the time. Because like, what's that going to develop? You're just going to be stuck being the same person for years on end. And it's not going to really let you continue to extend your capabilities.
I like how you said, Alex, I'm not going to rob you of that, because that was my intention, that I want you to like learn how to do this the right way so you have it in your toolkit. There have been a couple examples I can think of in my career where I actually did get too many softballs and I wouldn't say coasting, but I mean, it was easy. And looking back, I was like, shit, I think I was actually robbed of something because they either gave it to somebody else who they thought was better qualified to work on that project, or I don't know, I didn't ask for it. But yeah. I do think like there's a line between like being hard on someone to make sure you don't rob them of a valuable experience versus being a dick. Chad Gold from G2 said that he messed up something in an analysis when he was an investment banker, and his boss made him call the client to tell them that it was his fault. And he was like scared shitless to make the call. But he's like, my boss would have robbed me of the experience and kind of the skill set to come clean in a nervous environment and say I messed up and own it and like deal with that human relationship part of it. And he said, I would totally make my analysts do that too if it happened. As scary as it was at the time, it was formative for me. Hey, thanks for listening. We'll be right back after a word from our sponsors. CRMs are slow, hard to configure, and overly complicated. Attio changes that. Attio is a radically new type of CRM built specifically for the next generation of companies. It's flexible, easily configures to your unique data structure, and works for any go-to-market motion from self-serve to sales-led. Attio automatically enriches your contacts, syncs your emails and calendars, lets you create powerful custom reports, and quickly builds intricate Zapier-style automations. Say goodbye to one-size-fits-all CRMs and outdated user experiences. With Attio, you can focus on scaling your company to the next level. Try Attio instantly at attio.com. That's ATTIO.com. That is ATTIO.com. Well, you know what I always say, maintaining compliance is never complete, which is why most security and IT teams feel like they're always in audit purgatory. I'm there right now. But there is a solution, and it's easier than you think. Escape the infinite loop by using Thoropass's compliance and audit solution. Thoropass is the only solution using AI-infused technology and in-house auditors to take your team from start to stamp without leaving the platform. As a winner of multiple G2 awards, including top awards for usability and service, your team is in good hands with Thoropass. From onboarding with dedicated experts to audits from in-house auditors who know every aspect of your framework needs, you can have complete confidence in your Thoropass compliance journey. Thoropass is the only solution to offer audits for your most needed security frameworks. I'm talking HIPAA to High Trust and SOC 2 to ISO 27001. Woo! If you need PCI, DSS, pen tests, or any other major compliance framework, Thoropass can hook you up. With Thoropass, you never need to worry again. Relax, we fix audits. Find more at thoropass.com. That's THOROPASS.com. Tell them your boy CJ sent you. They'll hook you up. Boom.
What I love about like having worked for you and having gotten some of your quotes over the years is like
My
yours was always
CJisms.
Yeah,
my
your
wife's so
CJisms.
tired of hearing about them.
Yeah. I used to think of Gustav Sonian was always related to things like, you used to always think about FP&A as like Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. You'd go out and you talk to people. I used to think of FP&A as like linguistics because we're all speaking the same language, but everyone has a different accent. So you focus on different things, you care about different things. But at the end of the day, in order to communicate it, you need to be able to speak it in a way where people understand it, but you need to be able to change how you're saying what it is that you're looking at to really recognize the value that you can give. Because otherwise, you're going to walk away and someone's going to end up being like, wow, I get what he was trying to say, but that just sounded really weird.
Yeah. That we're going to clip that. That was a good one, Alex. And so you've walked into some other software companies since then, and you've experienced the job market post-COVID. What was that journey like?
Yeah, that was a thrill. One of the things, and I've always felt like I'm playing a little bit with house money when I approach the market, because I mean, I know you know this. I came from a family where both my parents were MBAs. My mom worked in broad-based compensation consulting and has run that business for 20 some years. And so from my angle, it's really nice to be able to walk in confidently with things data related to compensation. You've got the quant on top
Mom,
of it.
How much should I get paid?
Yeah, exactly. Right. Hey, here's the offer letter. Is this thumbs up, thumbs mid? What
I
are we
actually
doing?
remember your offer letter. You came back to me and asked for like something specific in equity. And I was like, what? Who is this? Who is this analyst I'm hiring that's negotiating and playing hardball with me? So I didn't realize at the time that your mom was helping you out.
Whatever it was, 18 months of experience was really throwing you
I was like, this guy's a good negotiator.
Yeah. No, I was like, this guy could do some comp. Okay. No, but I mean, that was the thing, was it's always been valuable for me because especially as the market turned through 23, I know a lot of folks. I mean, look, you look on LinkedIn, you look on CNBC, there's like 40 different articles a week at this point. People talk about it's no longer quiet quitting and it's no longer the great resignation, but now we're seeing this elongation of interview cycles and all of this stuff related to retention and attrition and whatnot. Honestly, from an FP&A perspective, it can be valuable too, because you can build that into models and assumptions. But when I was walking through it, I remember I'd gone through 2 job searches in 2023. Yeah. One was planned, one was not planned. My planned job search, on the bright side, because I had full control over it, I'm sitting there and I'm being very selective with my decision making and I'm taking the time to do it. But I remember I sent you a screenshot after I finally was like, okay, like last option here. We had a call where I put together a slide deck and I was like, hey, here's 10 jobs that I'm considering right now. What would you do? And you're like, well, you biased it really hard with like the 3 that I can tell that you're interested in. And I was like, yeah, okay, fair point. But that was the point, was while things were taking a long time, there was definitely a lot of appetite. But I remember at the same time, I sent you the sheet of a flow chart after the fact.
Yeah, what was
like
the top of funnel? What was the N on that?
The N of, I think, everything was, I had a total of 177 roles over the course of like 7 weeks of applying. Cause like I'd get off work and I'd be like 10 apps, 7 apps. And I was just kind of throwing those all out. And then to your point, like you can do an end count of it. It's like, well, but on top of that, even if you're doing 5 rounds, and that was light in some instances, was
getting a job is a job in and of itself.
Absolutely. And I think the big thing too was you have to learn to almost metagame your different job boards and get the market down, right? And I learned, and I would tell friends and colleagues where I said, the best lesson I learned was like, you can't apply to anything on LinkedIn that's been posted for more than 5 days. Because at that point, they've already got 150 applications and they're already doing first rounds. It's almost not even worth your time and effort, and not in a dismissive way. Because I saw roles where it would like break my heart over the fact, but I was like, it was posted 3 weeks ago. I know no one's even going to read this. And I saw that. I was like, I'm looking at it right now. I had 177 roles, 127 I never even saw a response to, good, bad, or indifferent.
And you had like a really solid resume, just for people out there. Like you went to an Ivy League school, you were a D1 athlete, you worked at 2 well-known companies. And I mean, the response rate, it's lower than people would expect, just to give them a reality check.
Well, and that's, I think, what was always interesting, right? Was, is it hit rate or is it success in depth, right? And I think that was the big thing, was hit rate was definitely lower than I think like most people would expect. And like when you talk about it, it's like apply to everything. Well, you kind of have to. But when you did hit the hits, or like when I did get a response, that was the big thing for me, was like, I'm looking at it, I'm like, if I had 177 roles and 150 were dead on arrival, but like then the remaining 25 got a response. I went to like third, fourth round with 22 or 23 of them. And the big thing was like, yeah, you could say, oh, that's super successful. It's more just like when you got the right match. And this kind of speaks to recruiters. So nowadays, when I'm setting headcount plans and I'm working with internal recruiters and trying to understand our capacity, it's like, look, recruiting teams and HR teams are under the same pressure that a lot of operating teams are nowadays. Long gone are the days of, hey, we've got 3 internal recruiters and then we're working with like 4 agencies and we've got all these people because we're trying to hire as quickly as we can. It's like, no, you might have 1 or 2 people. And even if you're spending all your day just doing screening calls and you have a 20% hit rate on that, give yourself a break in terms of understanding what the different actual HR capacity modeling is. It's not just sales driving top line. It's like you've got a lot of capacity underneath that. And I think that's a big component. Is like when I think about it, and then I got into my second job search, we went through the year, cost cutting continued to be more and more of a trend. And I saw the exact same trend extenuated through that, where I was saying my first job search was Q1 of 23. And I was like, there's a little bit less appetite than what I would have thought. But I mean, I'm still getting a lot of conversations. And even though the hit rate might have been, something like 15, 20%, it was like, well, but on the bright side, once those calls are taking place, you feel like you've got a lot of traction. Hit Q3 of 23 on an unplanned job search and whatever else. And you're like, wow, there's a lot of stuff moving around, a lot of moving parts. And I still feel like, you get into like 5, 6, 7 rounds. There's a lot of extension of those discussions. And I think a lot of that was, look, if it's not business critical, it's great to have it on the back burner. But maybe it's always good to have a little bit of an option there.
What was your mindset though? Like, I just need to get the interview, and if I'm in the room, like, I'll find a way to win this. Like, you're a well-spoken guy. Was it just, hey, this is a numbers game, I'm not going to take it too personally, just get me in the room?
Yeah, and I mean, saying it out loud, that sounds super conceited. Like, just get me in the room and I can convince you.
No, I think you got to have that confidence. Yeah. I don't think it's conceited at all, Alex. It's like betting on yourself.
Yeah, and I think that's the way to do it, because I guess the right way to phrase it then is to say, like, to that exact point, I know that I'm going to work very hard and I know I'm going to get the job done right. And so when I think about having that conversation, I mean, part of it comes back to working for you. Is I used to always say, whatever the job description is, whatever the role is, my job day to day is to make your life easier. Or it's like whoever my customer is, right? And we talk about, like, it could be business partners, it could be you if you're just like a core analyst leading a team. It's like, what your job is, regardless of what the day-to-day responsibilities are. And so being able to extend that when I could talk to someone, it was very organic for me and easy to just say, hey, look, I don't care what the business is. I don't care what the role title is or the responsibilities. When I'm talking to you, there's a reason I'm talking to you in an interview setting. It's because you're going to be interfacing with this role or you have a need. Let's just talk about what that is and let's see if I can solve it. And that was the big thing, was like, I think that's one of the things where, like, call it an FP&A skill set or whatnot, being able to define what your value is usually never going to line up with just bullet points on a job description. It's like, hey, let's talk about what the current problem is, recognizing that you'll be facing totally different problems in a year, probably even 6 months down the road, and we can get there when we get there. But in the meantime, let's talk about what I can do for you tomorrow.
And you'd put this question in the doc about what did I focus on to make the jump from like manager to director to CFO. And I was thinking about it. I was reading the doc on my phone while I was eating all of my daughter's Teddy Grahams in the kitchen 10 minutes before this started. And it was what you said. I identified who my customer was, because I truly think FP&A is a customer service role in many respects. And I like viciously, maniacally served them to the point, like, I got to make their life so much easier that when I take 1 week of vacation next year, they're going to be like, holy shit, I don't know what to do without CJ. That was my mentality. I'm going to serve you and make you look as good as possible, that you won't know what to do without me. I will be your comfort blanket, because the comfort blanket gets to go on important trips and it gets invited to important meetings. And I knew that would get me into the room.
100%. And that's, again, one of the things that I got to develop working for you was, like, our customer base expanded and then eventually evolved during our time working together.
I like how you said that. It did. I think that would be my advice for anyone out there. It's, you usually have one customer in any role it's in. Figure out what they don't like to do and make that the first thing that you pick up. So, like, maybe you work for a CFO who just, like, does not enjoy reading the contracts, sum up the vendor agreements for them. Or maybe they just don't enjoy being in Carta, like, become a Carta expert, and then figure out what you can do that they have on their schedule ahead of time that you can prepare them for. And you were always like a total assassin by spotting stuff on my calendar and like having a write-up on who I was going to meet with. You would tell me like random facts about them too, that I could even like make jokes about, like if they were like a movie buff or if they had gone to a certain college. Those are the little things that will never be in a job description, But if you can nail them for somebody, they won't forget how you were in service to them and the attention to detail it took.
Yep. Shamelessly requote. I'm rewatching Suits with people now. I can't remember if they like originally aired on HBO or whatever it was, but from the writing of that show, one of my favorite quotes that came out of it was, some people recognize that doing good work isn't the whole job. And that's not to be like, oh, like, look at, how expansive my skill set is. But there's different ways to say the same phrase, which is the job description's not the job, right? Like the role expands beyond, hey, here's why we hired you. What can you do now that you're in the door? And I think that was the thing, was like tying it back to earlier in the conversation. What are you good at? What are your strengths and weaknesses? I came from consulting. And so I was really used to being like, hey, look, doesn't matter what the problem is. Like you have your unique thing, you have your unique business. And potentially, depending on who I'm talking to, especially from something like comp consulting, like we're really talking about the psychology of your business. And that comes from you as a leader, right? Like if you're exec comp, when you talk about how much you want to pay your business, how much you want to try and attract talent, that's not just as simple as a numbers exercise. That's how, when, and where you want to invest in teams to grow different objectives that you're going after. And for me, I think a big component of recognizing that was like the human element of business often gets understated because it's not quantitative. It's really qualitative, and being able to build those relationships, build trust, and build confidence and comfort with someone is one of the biggest components in FP&A IR, obviously. But I mean, even just beyond that, we were talking about it kind of earlier, like, can you be someone who people enjoy working with, recognize that they can come to with problems and probably not only get a solution out of it, but actually enjoy the conversations? It's invaluable in terms of your ability to be someone that people want to collaborate with.
Yeah. And a lot of people think that I'm like this big numbers dork. Like, I do write mostly metrics, which I guess is mostly about metrics. And by the way, my mother-in-law, she's in jewelry, so she's not like in the software world or tech world at all. But when her friends at tennis ask what her daughter's husband does for work, she tells them I'm a mathematician. I think she just thinks that like I'm at like a whiteboard just doing math, like will and Goodwill Hunting.
I was about to say, I mean, you got the Goodwill Hunting lineup right there. I mean, it's like perfect.
That, or like the Charlie gif of like he has like all the papers and he's like mapping it all
just
out.
Just doing the red line connections.
Yeah, cigarette in one hand.
Yeah,
not
exactly.
me. But like I think I'm honestly probably like a B+ when it comes to the quantitative stuff. But I do think I'm higher on the scale when it comes to EQ. And it's a trend I'm kind of picking up on a lot of the CFOs I talk to, that like, the table stakes, they get the numbers right, but they understand that this is a business of people.
Yeah, I mean, one of the numbers, which I don't like to quote stats without them in front of me sometimes, so I'm kind of paraphrasing a bit, but I want to say trend-wise, like CFOs, it used to be the classic was, do you have a CPA or a CFA? Do you have an MBA? And then what is your breakdown of how long you've had those and what types of roles you've been in? Like, have you been in public accounting? Have you been in a lot of these big four roles? Right? Well, but that's a perfect example, is like, you step into the role, you have success, and you're able to leverage the skill set that you have via EQ, via your existing metrics knowledge. And to your point, table stakes, you can pull it off. But that's the thing, is what used to be a traditional skill set nowadays has evolved, because whether FP&A is more strategic, cross-functional, or just in general, people are recognizing that that type of dynamic skill set is changing. I mean, we were talking about it like with a COVID perspective. From me, I think one of the things that's been challenging for a lot of businesses, and this could be from a comp perspective, when you're talking about trying to attract talent who could be basically nationally located on a remote basis, when you're trying to talk about building culture and building reporting relationships so you can maintain your existing talent base, a lot of that type of stuff, it's no longer just as simple as here's like a brand name that's really good to work for in a city that you know is a business center. Like, it expands beyond that. And I think a big component of that is, when you talk about developing skill sets, a big component is, how can you get people to understand the assignment from the perspective of being bought into the business, being bought into the team, when you don't have the easy, oh, let's just go get drinks after work, or let's go do like the third Friday of the month team lunch. You've got to be a little bit more creative than just saying like, here's a comp dinner and call it a day.
I think it is a bit harder managing remote. There are puts and takes. Like being a finance guy, sometimes I'm like, this is awesome. Like, people can't just knock on my door and ask for money. That's probably the curmudgeon in me. But at the same time, I think what you gain in efficiency, you lose in trust. And what I mean by that is, like, it's a lot easier to say something that's tough over the computer on Zoom or over Slack and remove some of the human element to it, for better or for worse, usually for worse. And that's something I think I've noticed even more working remotely over the last year. Like, I'll get together with people and I'm like, that person's not really that bad. Like, I'm probably misinterpreting what they're saying to me on Slack, but at the same time, I'm still pissed off, like pacing around my kitchen.
Yep. No kidding. No. And I mean, I think that's another thing too, is when we talk about like January, February was again one Q1 of tech layoffs. And it's been this extenuating trend going back to last year. But I think one of the things it's like, I used to always joke with you, I was like, how often do you think businesses just do some of these OpEx decisions because they saw their public comp do it and they go, yeah, we should probably do that too. And I mean, as much as it's, of course, never that simple, there's always a level of like the psychology of business changes. And particularly when you've got a remote workforce or you've got a comp or an audience that's changed in terms of having the concentration of people that were just down the street. I used to laugh like when we were at the 100 Summer Street office in Boston and you had 5 existing comps that were within like 6 blocks of the building. Now it's like, well, I'm a good example. I was in downtown Boston for 4 or 5 years. And now I'm in Madison, Wisconsin. And I still talk to people who were also in Boston who are scattered all around the US now. And you talk to them about like, hey, how's business culture, work culture? And it's no longer that change of like, oh man, people used to complain about like my dad would go into work at the LA Times and complain about his hour-long commute where he had to drive to a train station, then take the train, and then he would talk to people, meet people that work downtown. Nowadays, It's like, how do you expand off of that and build that off of it? Your assumption of work culture or how people are feeling from an employee basis may just be based off of CNBC or like LinkedIn posts.
Yeah, what are the vibes on like LinkedIn
exactly.
these days?
It's a vibe check nowadays. You just go on LinkedIn and someone's like, food for thought, please read my podcast or like do whatever else. Yeah. And you're just like, I mean, okay, man.
10 Google Chrome plugins to accelerate productivity.
By the way, please subscribe and like and share with your mom. And it's like, well, okay, I mean, I get it that maybe you don't like your current job or whatever it is, but you start to see enough of that. And it's kind of like, is the truth something else? Or is it what I read online? Or is it what I'm experiencing, which can sometimes be a black box?
Yeah, it's funny. And I'm somewhat of that guy on LinkedIn because I'm always like pumping up the pod or mostly metrics, but I'm always trying to find like, what's the level of cringe I'm willing to go to and then pull back just a little bit. That's my barometer.
Yeah, it's the same thing as like trying to set the right number for that reforecast of like, okay, so we've got good growth, and now
we can hit that revenue number, but bring it down 5%.
Just a little bit. Let me drop one of the exclamation points off that final call to action of, hey, here's the last link, and we'll say, oh, that looks good.
Hey, thanks for listening. We'll be right back after a word from our sponsors. Reduce burn, extend runway, do more with less. Operational efficiency. These are all catchphrases that we know all too well because of the headwinds business leaders face in today's growth environment. Growth is now a battle, not a breeze. While teams are on the front lines fighting every day for top-line yardage, there are hidden savings opportunities right beneath their feet. That's where Tropic comes into play. Their procurement platform brings order and process to a historically decentralized and chaotic business function: purchasing and supplier management. Tropic serves as the front door for procurement that your entire company will want to use. By combining intake forms, pricing benchmarks, approval workflows, and supplier management all in one place, Tropic makes savings opportunities easy to find and act on. When you pour blood, sweat, and tears into revenue growth, doesn't it make sense to protect what you have fought for? Visit tropicapp.io/metrics to learn how modern businesses are controlling spend to extend their runway. Your board will thank you. Your budget will thank you. Your bottom line will thank you. All right, Alex, what other topic should we hit on here?
I think one of the fun ones when I think about the last couple of years and we talk about what are the things that you're really proud of. I mean, like, here's the thing. You asked me like, what was I like as a boss? What was it like to work together when you interviewed and whatnot? And I think about you and I'm like, one of the great things that I took away from our working relationship was, again, you were just far enough down the road where I was like, I could put a long-term plan in place to feel like, here's the skills that I need to develop to be on your track record, right?
Yeah.
One of the things that you told me actually in our first performance review, and it's like stuck in my head ever since, because it was like, wow, if I like wrote down what I want a boss to tell me, and then he actually did it without being
I didn't
like,
pay him to say this.
Yeah, exactly. Right. No kidding. And I remember it because it was so impactful to me. You said, I want to be a good manager. I'm going to rate myself accordingly by saying what I want to do is give you the opportunities and give you the support to achieve the goals that you want to achieve faster than I would have. It's kind of like roughly what you said. And I remember I walked out of that. I'd only been working for you for like 4 or 5 months. It was during COVID. We were full remote. And I'm like sitting in the backyard with my dad because we're working out of like a group house in North Carolina because they just left.
Next to the baby.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm like sitting there and I was like, wow, that was like a really, really cool performance review. My dad's like, well, the cool thing is now you don't have an excuse because if you don't achieve what you want, it's because you didn't work hard enough. And I was like, that's the most Midwestern thing I've ever heard, but you did grow up in Chicago. That was the thing is I was like, cool. I can look at your resume now and I'm like, you're a CFO. You have this fantastic track record of different businesses you've been at, different skill sets you've acquired and you've mastered. And so I think one of the cool things to look at is then say, like, on paper, you're really impressive. But like everybody has a different thing that they really value, they really care about. And so like when you think about your resume, what's the one thing that if you were to like frame it on a wall and say, forget everything else, this is what I'm really proud of, this is what I'm really excited about, what would that be for you?
So it's not there yet. I think it's a work in progress, but I think about my career kind of like an NFL coaching tree. So I would love if in 20 years I had a legacy that people could point to and say like, oh, Alex worked for CJ and he went on to do X, Y, and Z. Oh, this guy Mike or this guy Peter worked for CJ. He went on to do this and that. Because I think the true testament of someone who made their mark is that they made people who went on to do successful things and hopefully more successful than themselves. And I've worked for people before where I could tell that there was this bit of friction. Like, I want you to do well, but I don't want you to do better than I did. Or they'll bring up like, when I was your age, I was in this position, as if they're like angry that you got there faster.
Yeah.
And I look at it like, this makes me look like an all-star because I helped them get to that point. And honestly, like, it's no fun if you're not cheering for the other people and sharing in their success. I think I'm a very milestone and goal-driven person, and it's cool to hit my own goals. But to have people who are pumped up about hitting theirs and you feel like you had a part in it, like, that's what I hope. So I hope like if there was something framed behind me in 10 years, it's kind of like the Belichick or Shanahan coaching tree of people who did well.
Yeah. I like to think about it as to your point around Charlie and his red line. I imagine you just having a bunch of like LinkedIn pulled icons. You're just like pulling everybody based off of like wherever they're sitting or whatever business they're working at. But like I will say, and you didn't pay me to say this, I think about one of the things that if I was to contextualize or like get a theme for what it was to like work with you, there were so many times where I was, when I say surprised, probably not the right verb, but so happy in the moment where it was like, we'd be on a call, we're diving into this or that or whatever else. And I'm sitting there and I kind of got like that, analyst mindset of, okay, like I know what I've analyzed, but I don't trust my level of experience to match yours. Right.
Yeah.
And we'd be sitting talking about something and you would just be like, hey, Alex, what do you think about that? And I was like, well, I just told you what the numbers are. And you're like, yeah, but what do you think about it? Like, what does it mean? I'm not asking you to give me like an A plus B equals C. That's the answer. And I was like, wow. And then part of that was you developing that skill set to eventually be a little bit more abstract. But the other component is you're like, look, when you're 24, 25, 26, and you're like, hey, I know just enough to like get myself into trouble now. And I really want to be able to understand where I can take this. Having someone who you look up to and appreciate not only their skill set, but their trajectory, their personality, everything that ties into that. And then have them be like, no, I'm listening to what you are saying, not what the numbers are saying, was one of those things that was really valuable. You
give me a lot of credit, but like looking back, what was I? I was like a 27 or 28-year-old director running like a finance group. And the same thing, like now I became CFO at 31. I'm 33 now. Dude, I'm making it up on the fly. Like people act like they had this whole philosophy of how to work with others. And I don't know, I'm trying to steal the good from some really good leaders I've seen and also forget some of the bad. I honestly think that's half of the battle. Just noticing what you don't want to be.
Yep.
It's very kind of you to say that, but looking back, I was making it up on the fly.
But I mean, what's that? They always say it's why improv comedy is the best form of comedy. There's no plan to that. You just have to be able to like think on your feet. Like there's a reason why like Whose Line Is It Anyway has been running for like 25 years and it's like everyone's favorite comedy show, right?
They just keep saying and at the end of a statement. Is that what you're supposed to say in improv?
Yeah, exactly. Just keep saying and then kind of build it off of there. And then once people stop laughing, start to kind of move on to the next bit.
I think we got time for one or two more topics if you want to hit on them. I usually don't do current events.
Yeah.
But somebody me and you studied. We knew what type of shoelaces he had.
Yep.
What do you think of the Frank Slootman retirement?
If I ignore the fact that my portfolio went down a lot that day, no. I mean, I think one of the cool things about working in this environment of SaaS, and when I say this environment, like working in broad cybersecurity, is there's a lot of interconnectedness of the network, like you were just saying, but there's a lot of focus on vision related to how does someone who really builds an ecosystem around their product, around their platform, and the vision, it ties into like everything we've discussed, like communication skills, being able to get buy-in, but expanding that even beyond a business. Leadership is probably now more than ever exceedingly important. And I think one of the big things is when you look at this, I mean, it's tough because first you're like, wow, the guy's just a fantastic businessman. I used to always laugh. I was like Bozeman, Montana, turning into the new Silicon Valley simply because of their incorporation. But you're just like, I think one of the cool things about it is, first of all, hype if he retires, hype if he decides to go and do something else. But I think the biggest component is it's like, it really does lay groundwork for recognizing the importance of trust, the importance of building a mission statement where you can recognize, hey, this is not just something that's, oh, it's a company selling a product. It's like, this is a vision, this is data beyond what you think of as an exported report that you're going to run some numbers off of. It's being able to say that you're someone who can actually build a company of thousands of people who has always been able to drive them towards one marching point. And if anything, it's kind of like, again, how do you tie that in? A lot of groundwork, a lot of focus on relationships and building that interconnected cross-functional mission statement where it's not as simple as just saying like, and people used to joke like, what was the Alphabet joke when they reincorporated to Alphabet from Google and they removed "don't be evil" from their mission statement or something like that? There's kind of that level of truth where it's like uncertainty, obviously no one likes at this current point, and particularly like with the existing tech market and how much frothiness there is, there's a lot of question mark there. But at the same time, it's also just like, dang, it's got to be really, really cool to know that at the end of the day, like for him, you look at your resume, you can even look at the day that you retire equals a major blip on a stock, like a candlestick chart forever to recognize like, well, you were talking about like, what would be something you'd be proud of? And maybe this is something
I could retire, make a stock go down 25%.
Yeah, just be like power tripping and like frame a candlestick like right on the back. You're just like, yeah, you could see when my press release hit right there. And you just watch
that's funny, dude.
Billions of dollars just liquidate the moment you're like, yeah, I don't want to do this anymore.
How important are you? Approximately $26 billion.
Yeah, exactly. I can quantify my net worth to the dime and be like, wow, that's pretty impressive. And you're like, no, not my holdings, your holdings. That's what matters.
Yeah. This is very meta, but I thought the most telling thing about it was the way that the media covered his retirement. It was kind of like when Brady retired or like when Michael Jordan retired, they had like all these highlights ready to go. But instead of like alley-oops and dunks and crossovers, it was earnings reports and LinkedIn posts he had made on culture. I was like, this is like we're celebrating an athlete. This is kind of cool.
It felt like it was like the Queen Elizabeth thing where you're just like, wow, like what a legacy she left. Oh man, like Mr. Slootman, what a legacy you've had on tech and data warehousing solutions. So
yeah, great job, Frank. We all look up to you. Nobody talked about Rise of the Data Cloud. That book was a bit of a snooze. They didn't get blacklisted
they didn't
for saying
understand
that.
The message.
Amp It Up was good though. Amp It Up was good.
I was going to say, well, I mean, maybe one of the only reasons the stock went down is because not enough people recognize the true, rise of data lakes. So gosh, I just remember thinking about like how cloud hosting spend increased and then thinking about how that can be the entire business that you're selling on a quantitative level. Like you talked about like a B plus, so being a quantitative guy, I was like, having that breadth of data, I can't even imagine the SQL queries required to run analytics off of that. I mean,
me and you would meet with the infrastructure people because we were at a period of time where like it got so big that we actually had a team for infra and we'd be like, can you explain how this works to me? Because we're trying to forecast it. And he would explain it. Me and you would both look at each other and we'd be like, okay, can you explain that again, how it works?
Yep. Well, and that's one of the funny things too, is I remember, I think I'd finally started to get to a point when it came to anything related to consumption and data analytics where I was like, okay, not perfect. But one of the biggest lessons I took away was like, okay, this is not a cost metric that's going to be better understood simply by doing more analytics off of it. Instead of taking 3 hours a week to do a bunch of spreadsheet work, I should just take an hour a week to go and talk to the person that runs this and understands it the most, right? Like that was what
such
was
a big
valuable.
takeaway.
Yeah. But then I remember because I was like, okay, cool. I think I'm finally starting to wrap my head around this. And I finally built that relationship up to a point where I can get value out of it. And then it was like, then you go to another business where everything is different. All hosting and everything related to cost management is different. And I remember thinking the same thing, like, oh, we're restarting the 12 to 18 month relationship pipeline on this front. Though I will say, like, one of the interesting things at my current role is we went from hosting being almost entirely externally driven on a consumption metric where you kind of just had to wait and see what the trends were on users to now we're actually kind of running it back on a prem basis. And so hosting is primarily oriented around R&D. And so I think it's a really interesting dynamic to shift it around because I got so used to trying to throw a dart at a moving target while blindfold is now being like, it's a controllable expense again.
Yeah.
But R&D still rolls into your ability to hit go-to-market targets. And it's like, you can almost build it off a consumption model again. And it's weird because you're like, I'm going to be in for a rude awakening when we go back to a full oriented cloud service or whatever else. And you're like, okay, revenue to hosting does not scale linearly. Do not try to pull that off.
Alex, you remain so much smarter than I am. That was a soundbite right there. I think one of the biggest career life hacks, and it was a realization to me when we worked together, was we put this once a month recurring meeting with the director of product marketing on the calendar. And we would just go in and be like, dude, just like, how does this product work? Can you break it down? Because I think there are so many finance people out there who work at like cybersecurity companies or infra companies or AI companies, and like they act like they know what it does, but like, dude, do you really know what you're selling? And I say product marketing because they have a way of translating what the company does into like something that a common person can understand. Like they're not going to hit you with like the bytes explanation of it. They're going to hit you with like, why is this important and what's the story behind it? And I think that was a huge inflection point for me because I finally felt confident telling the company's story because I could talk about the product and how the metrics link to it. But before then, I felt a little naked up there, just like using buzzwords around security stuff. I knew the metrics really well, but when they went into like, I don't know, some of the acronyms, I was the emperor who had no clothes.
Yeah, well, that was like particularly we started to run around in IR. And after you left, I think one of the things was kind of stepping into that more full time. And I remember when you would read resumes and it was like, oh, okay, we're having a buy side conversation and it's not the same ecosystem, but we're going to be speaking the same language, right? And it might be that accent difference, but like you'll still be there. And then I remember I started to see resumes where it was like, this guy has a PhD in computer science with like a specialization. And I was like, so I'm not going to be even able to pretend like I can lie to this guy. Not that we would, but you get
no,
the,
but there are
point.
levels of like faking it till you make it when you meet with certain investors. And there were a couple where it was like, CJ, by the way, like don't bullshit this guy.
When he asks you a question, just be very confident on I'm going to have to get back to you on that. And that was a big thing was it was like, there was so much of an orientation around like, hey, I can expand so much of this, but then also the other component of like learning how to explain things, not just from it's a finance perspective, but this is my own understanding of how to contextualize this for myself to learn it. Because from a technical standpoint, you're not in the same level of detail from that tech stack point, but you can still communicate it. And then the big thing again was public comping and recognizing like, what does it really mean? Because like that was another thing. You look at public comps, and I'd done this all the way back in consulting where it was like, what are 20 alike companies and put that together to be a peer group? And you're like, okay, yeah, but just because we all work in cybersecurity, just because we all work in, code security or endpoint security or whatever else, it's like, don't put us together. Like, you can't sit at the table. Don't talk about us like that. There was a big thing about that related to understanding all the nuance and then tying that into storytelling. Be it IR, you can apply the same skill set to FP&A and understanding like how different subsets of engineering don't play along in the same sandbox. Those are the types of things where you learn to be a little bit more flexible with your thought process simply because you have the conversation. It doesn't mean you get into like the nth degree of detail. You just get a little bit more nuance in terms of how you hold the conversation.
Yeah. And it's like this progression of you just inch more and more into understanding the realm of what the tech actually does.
Just in time for another product release and you start from square zero again. So
exactly. Alex, this has been a blast having you on the pod. We got to make you a frequent friend.
Yeah. And I think one of the things, if I was to tie it in, because you'd mentioned we used to have this standing monthly with product marketing, whoever it would be, shout out Robbie. I think a big thing, which you didn't touch on, I laughed about it because I was thinking about, what were the things that I really enjoyed about having you as a boss? What were the things that I really enjoyed about the culture of working together? One of the most important meetings that you ever did was a 30-minute standing water cooler Friday mornings. And I used to laugh about it because I was like, how important is that really? And I thought about it after the fact and I was like, there was something so important about simply making the time to build a relationship that was so like, and you talk about work, you would do whatever. It came out naturally.
We would just bullshit.
Yeah, just talk about whatever. And it was one of those things where then it's like I recognize it after the fact where I was like, you got 2.5 years, 3 years of just being able to actually have a relationship with someone. And then of course you're establishing that you're building it. But like that was one of the things it's like being able to have that actual interpersonal conversation in a community. It makes a massive difference in your ability to then function as a team. You tie it back to EQ, you tie it back to whatever else. It's like, there's a bunch of hallmark phrases that you could put on a postcard and send to someone and be like, here's what it's like to work for me, like hashtag culture first. But at the end of the day, if you're not able to really drive it, and if you can't make it organic, it's kind of like, why even bother? And like, that was a big thing was if there was like a bottom line first takeaway, which of what it was like to work for you is it felt real. It was organic. It wasn't a production. It was like, I'm working for someone who gets it. I get to build a skill set with this person. And along the way, like I actually feel like I'm going to really enjoy it.
It's organic if you and the entire FP&A team spend 30 minutes on a Friday researching deadly snakes in Florida and discussing which ones you were most afraid of.
We were talking about the gator line too, because I was like right as my parents were moving down to North Carolina. And I was like, my dad did A, B, or C. And then I used to always have to cry about the fact that my dad was just so much more interested in me about everything. And I guess maybe you don't want the FP&A person to have a super exciting background, but like it's tough when you want to like come to show and tell with a cool story and you're like, well, yesterday I reallocated all of my 401k positions and then tomorrow I'm going to go and file my taxes. You're like, great, this guy's
all right, wait, but before we go, doesn't your dad have like the #1 website for bonsais in the world?
Bonsainet.com. I think we're, gosh, I don't want to paraphrase it. I think we're up above 20,000 registered users now. Actually, no, you know what I could do is just
he's got the largest community and website for bonsai trees, the world's most interesting man.
Bonsainet.com, 60,000 threads, over 1 million messages sent, 30,000
it's like the Reddit
members.
for bonsai trees.
Yeah, trust me, if you are looking to get into Japanese horticulture, that is the place for you. Bonsainet.com. I will not drop my dad's email account because I'm not sure how much crossover we have, but if there's one thing I know that he wouldn't like, it's getting
outside my TAM. So it's slightly overlapping.
Yeah, CAC to LTV is not going to be there for you. But trust me, again, if you want to get into anything related to rock gardens or bonsai, that's the place to be.
Heard it here first. All right, buddy. It's always great to catch up. We'll have you back on.
Always. Yeah, really appreciate it, CJ. Happy Tuesday afternoon on a beautiful March afternoon.
Happy Tuesday.
Happy Tuesday. Better than Friday.
Roll the credits, producer Natalie. Run the Numbers is part of the Turpentine Podcast Network. It is produced by Natalie Torren and edited by Justin Golden. Album artwork by Some AI Thing. Yelling and intro by Fat Joe. If you made it this far, please give us 5 stars. I really need this.